Hi, folks. Tom Johnson Medlin. I wanted to spend some time with you today on a teaching that I find extremely valuable, extremely helpful at this critical moment in our history as a people. Uh, right now, we're experiencing the pandemic, and while this information is being pulled together and this training is being done to address issues of self care during the pandemic, I think these issues of self care should be analyzed in similar fashion for other areas in our life. Just when we're having a difficulty in trying to provide self calming, self soothing behavior in our lives to bring down the level of our stress, to remove the disturbances from our lives, I think we can use these same techniques at those other junctures in life. But in particular, we're taking a look at how to provide remedies for our stress, the disturbances in our life, those things that cause us internal turmoil. Right? I think as I've looked back over my history in working in hospice, of the number of times that I've been asked to do a compassion fatigue or burnout workshop, stress relief, I think of all the data that we've collected in putting those workshops together. And I feel pretty confident today that I can say to you that I know of two reasons that the self care that we try to apply to our own lives does not seem to be efficacious for us. Right? We've all had stress or moments of turmoil and calamity where we have tried to do something to take care of ourselves, and we feel no better as a result of it. Right? So, two reasons that I've stumbled on in the years of working with people who share consistently from their own stories about fatigue, compassion fatigue, uh, physical fatigue, and also burnout, is that one, the tendency is we don't feel a sense of self care when we don't tell ourselves that what we're about to do is in order to take care of ourselves, right? So that kind of they call it witness consciousness in meditation or in the internal journey of psychotherapy, right? Gaining a sense of separation enough from yourself to be able to look and say, I'm doing this to be able to care for that portion of who I am. So that ability to look at it and say that I'm about to do what I'm going to do because I'm trying to take care of myself. That's the first and most important to me. The second, and also of reasonable elusiveness, right, is that knowing that we are more than just one thing, that we are a component or an aggregate of many, many areas and many, many parts of ourself or many, many selves within one self. And so knowing exactly where the distress is coming from and then applying the remedy to that portion of life also tends to help us to feel that what we are doing is actually efficacious and is making some impact. So again, telling ourselves before we do things that I'm going to do this because I'm stressed out at whatever it is, because of the pandemic and my inability to travel, because of the pandemic and my inability to get personal space because my kids and my grandkids are all studying at home, right? Whatever it is, tell yourself that you're about to do that in order to tend to yourself. And then the other piece is figure out where the distress is genuinely coming from and not just lump it all together and say, I feel like blah, but honing in, focusing, finding out where that is in you, and then applying a remedy that can address that. So that's what we're here to talk about today, really, is to look at a paradigm that I have faithfully listened to in the lives of hospice patients and their caregivers over the years and assembled as a puzzle, but that we have many, many different pieces of our lives as individuals, and we interface in many, many places in our lives socially. And those things have a tendency to impact us. And so if we can dig a little deeper below the distress, below the disturbance, and find out which portion of our life is being impacted, then we can develop a remedy that is much more efficacious, as I said before. If you're working in the shop and you're, building a shelf and you are using your hammer and the hammer slips off of the finishing nail because it has such a small head and it slams instead into your thumb, you don't run into the house and get ice and put it on your big toe, right? You apply the ice to the thumb, the place where the pain is, where the injury is. The remedy is efficacious when it is applied to the proper space of disease, right? Or illness or discomfort. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And hopefully that'll be novel enough for you that you'll gain incredible mileage on taking care of yourself and the different pieces of stress and distress that come up, not only during the coronavirus, but also through other difficult portions of life. So I'm going to share my screen with you now for a second. And today what we're looking at is we are looking at self-care throughout life's journey, not just now, but throughout the whole of the journey. So let's start off with saying, if we were to come up with synonyms for well-being, what would they be? And I've just listed a few, but I think you should write down a couple of your own down on your pad of paper. But I think a sense of security, a sense of good feeling, and good impression, right? Sense of prosperity, a sense of profit or comfort, happiness, safety, protection, success, welfare, health, contentment, calm, peace, right? All of these things, these are synonyms for well-being, but there is clearly a sense of all things are right when we're talking about well-being in our lives. So there's some synonyms. Let's take a look at what some antonyms are. So some antonyms, or those things that reflect the opposite of well-being, might be misery, loss, injury, failure, danger, sadness, hurt, unhappiness, illness. I think dis-ease, right, is another one. And the word itself, dis-ease, is not just about a disease, but it's about the inability of a system in us or some portion of our life to feel at ease. So these are really good synonyms. I would jot down a few of your own if you have some. And so what we want to do is we want to figure out, how can we bring well-being into our life in such a fashion as it is helpful and that it feels as if it is being effective, in what we do. And in the first section, what we've realized is that we have more than just one component to our life. Matter of fact, we have several, and this is only 4 that I've selected here. Other people would have another set of qualifiers, but I'm going to use these 4, and these 4 are aggregates in us, places where there are constellations of feelings or impressions or attitudes that are a little bit different from each other. They are the 4 pieces that I think make up an individual. And again, I'm using 4 because we can't talk about 100. And these seem to be the best buckets to dump things in. I think other people might add to the list of mind and heart and soul and body. They might add spirit. And that would be a whole separate conversation. And that also connects up to people's sense of faith and their sense of religion and their sense of existential belief in the afterlife and in the divine principle or God. So because there is so much divergence around those pieces of our lives, I'm going to leave that off, and that can be for a whole other conversation. But I think we can pretty consistently agree on the fact that we all have a mind, right? We have something up here that helps us to think, right? And we're going to look at each of these and what is aggregated in those areas. So I don't want to talk about them too much. We also have a heart, or an emotional center, a place where we feel from, right? We also have a soulful side, and the soul in this relationship is a little different than spirit. Many people rely upon soul and its religious definition of being an engine of the spiritual life. But I think the easiest way for me to describe how I'm going to use the soul is to say that we have soulful places in our lives that are deeper than emotions and deeper than thoughts of the mind, and that these are underground, almost emotions. They're much more solid than the emotional system in us. So, for example, It is a soulful thing to feel or to long for a sense of connection to other people and not to be alone. That's more than just an emotion. It's a drive that we long for connection with other people, right? So I think the soul, if we were to use Jungian or Freudian terminology, might be these desires and longings that exist in us, deeper than emotions, bigger, more powerful, much more energy involved in the body. Um, so we've got a mind, we've got a heart, we've got a soul, and I think we can all agree we've got a body, like it or not. Okay, so these are the four areas we're going to take a look at. I think what's also important is not only as an individual are we walking around with a body, a mind, a heart, and a soulful side, that we exist relationally in some social layers or some social aggregates all around us. And so that sometimes what is being impacted is our social self or our familial self or our global self or our individual self. And when we're trying to find out where it is we're feeling the stress, it may not only be in the individual, may not just be ours alone. And so that when we look to remedies in our lives, we may have to look at different layers or levels of applying those remedies. For example, there is a sense of angst, I think, that we can all remember looking back at globally in the 60s, 70s, and even early 80s about the nuclear arms race, where there was a sense of global unrest, and there were studies even done in the late 60s, mid 70s about the psychological well-being of children in schools after running those drills where people had to hide under their desks and practice brushing, fallout off of themselves in the event of a nuclear war or disaster. That is a global layer, right? Where we feel something and it is distressing at a global level. We probably won't be able to solve that by applying only a personal response or a personal remedy to our life. That really part of that unrest in our life won't be solved until we can globally address the larger issues. So what we're going to do, we're going to spend most of our time on the individual because that I think is the most important part of self-care that we're going to share today. But keep in mind that some of these issues that you may be reacting to as a person, as an individual, may not be completely within your ken or in the realm of your authority and or power to bring solutions for. Right? But hopefully we are genuinely able to bring a majority of solutions and remedies to our individual lives. So we're going to look at that. So let's start off first by saying, hey, what is it that makes a mind or healthy mind or a normal mind, right? What is normal for us in our mind? Because what we're going to talk about after this is what does it look like when the mind is having a sense of disturbance or some kind of stress or some anxiety, okay? So let's just go through the four aggregated areas within our individual personality and talk about what we do. What do you do with your mind? Well, it's pretty easy. We can read, we can play, we can sequence things one after another. We can accommodate to decisions. We can weigh and plan and research. We can correct. We can interpret. We can attribute one thing to another, like make connections like, oh, I went outside today and it was sunny, so therefore I felt warm. And then the next time you go out and I went out today and it was raining, but now I feel wet. So you can make those kind of interpretations or attribute one thing as a result of another thing or cause and effect, right? We can evaluate. We can put things in order based on dependencies. We can remember, which is probably one of the greatest features that people identify with in the mind, or we can find things. We can actually use the mind to uncover mystery. This all happens, we think for the most part with our cranium, and we tend to believe that it is our head where the mind, is in existence. It doesn't matter. We just want to look at this as one of the aggregates within us, but one of the aggregates within us is all about cognition, and it's much more word driven, right? than perhaps the emotional side of us. It is tends to be much more logical. So first of all, you're going to want to find out, is it in the mind where you're having a problem? Is it in the heart? Is it in the soul? Is it in the body? So this is what goes on in the mind in a daily, routine, regular, kind of normal uh, circumstance. How about the heart? What goes on in the heart? Well, the heart is the place of emotion. And in there, we have things like kindness and play and fondness and love and jealousy, fear, delight, goodness, happiness, folly, joy, hope, anger, right? Peace, anxiety, right? That doesn't have to be a positive emotion only, patience and gentleness. So the emotions are what exist in this emotive area of our life, what we call the heart most often. And you'll begin to see that when we start talking about the different pieces of the individual, that some of this overlaps and that some of it is cause and effect, right? And it's not necessarily linear in its cause and effect. In other words, just because you have a thought doesn't mean you'll have an emotion for that. You may have an emotion for something first and it prompts you to have a thought. But most often, and the easiest way to describe this is if you're sitting down and looking at a family photo album and you're going through pictures and you're starting to tell stories that come from the pictures or in the stories, while you're telling those stories, you will have an emotional response. So one part of your personality, one part of your persona can establish and collect material for another area. This is that whole reason why we all say things about how our thoughts can actually change our physiology, because we know that our thoughts can drive our emotions. And we also believe that not only can our thoughts drive our emotions, but they can also drive how our body develops it. If nothing else, having negative thoughts produces negative emotion, which probably produces negative responses in the body, right? And that's where we think disease comes from in many of the non-Western forms of medication and medicine. Okay, so we've got so far a mind, we've got a heart. We know that the heart can be triggered by the mind, right? That story of Uncle Harry can make you laugh. That story of Aunt Louise can make you cry, right? And now we're going to go to the third area, which is the soul, or the soulful area. This is in the place in life where we have deeper emotions like love and forgiveness, right? So forgiveness is a little bit deeper here in the soul because sometimes people hold on to an emotion for their whole life. And because of that emotion, like maybe they're angry at somebody and they hold on to that anger for, oh, let's say 12 years, maybe not their whole life, it tends to interrupt or disturb their sense of forgiveness because they're holding on to that anger. And so the way they are used to forgiving people now all of a sudden includes this ability to hold on to something for 12 years that's a negative feeling. So when we have a thought that is impacting our emotion, remember that it's also impacting something deeper under the surface. And so forgiveness is one of those deeper, we can call them deeper emotions, but I like to say drives, one of these deeper drives. Longing is a deeper drive, right? We long to be successful. We long to be independent. We long to be connected. We long to have a sense of equanimity and peace, right? So these longings, they're almost like the depths of the ocean. It's a little harder to put words to them, right? These longings, they drive people forward. Sexuality is one of those longings, right? That doesn't always have words for it. It's just sort of a relational connection, a deeper sense of love. And then there is this whole part of that where it is not connected to cognitive thinking. So the same is true with love. It has also, we love people because we love them, right? Sometimes there's reasons, but there is this innate sense of love that you don't violate in life. Like your love for your grandchildren. You would do anything for them. We hear people say over and over again. So that's not the same as, uh, the love that comes from, let's say, sitting down and reading a wonderful book that you really love and it puts a sense of fondness in it. The love for a grandchild or for a child or for a family member or for a dear friend. This is deeper than just emotion. So integrity is there. I think hatred is one of those deep, deep drives, right? You've been in a situation where somebody is very, very angry and they hate someone. And what you're experiencing, that dark, ugly sense of ugh, that you feel being in that situation, it loses its ability to find words to describe it, right? And it's not just simply an emotion, it's deeper than that. So again, these are areas that we don't often talk about. We usually lump all this stuff together with emotion, and this is probably the harder of the areas to divide out from the rest of the aggregates in an individual personality. But I think you can get a sense of it when I say the soulful area of our life is that place when you've had a horrible day and your day is just so bad that you don't have any words for it. Your emotions feel kind of numb. You go out and you get in the car. First thing you do is you put on that CD. And I mean that CD, right? That one CD, that one song that you know that's going to take you from what you are feeling in those deep places in you. And it's going to get you out of that funk and move you beyond that place, right? And it can be a really loud song, it can be a really passionate song, it can be a really funny song, but it's the thing that takes everything about you at this moment and turns it off and turns it onto some other place. And that is where the soulfulness in our lives live. So it's pretty powerful. A lot of play exists here. Also, areas of faith and hope and prayer, they are a part of the soulful self as well. Things like surrender, right, and acceptance. These are deeper than just simply emotion, but this is the soulful side of us. And then I think the last piece of the personal or individual identity we want to talk about is the body. And with the body, we do things like we move, we rest, we consume, we look for strength, we dance, we love, we bond, we sleep, um, we feel, we play, right? So the body really then becomes, if you will, almost like the stage upon which the mind and the heart and the soulful self can kind of play itself out. And we can have the body do things that can enforce certain thoughts and feelings and soulful sides of ourselves or drives. We can have the body do things that seem antithetical to them, but so it can function on its own, or it can be a mouthpiece for those other parts of our life. But so can you see how we are very complex and very diverse and very layered existence that we have, that it's not just as simple as saying, I don't feel good. When we say we don't feel good, we're not really giving up much information to ourselves or to anybody else about where we don't feel good. So one of the things that I've seen over and over again is when we talk with hospice patients, trying to help them identify where it is that something is coming from is so critical in helping them understand how they can work with it. So this is how those things work normally, right? How the mind, the heart, the body, and the soul work. But let's take a look at something else. What happens when we have an interruption? What about when along comes a spider and sits down beside us? Right? When something in life comes along and it jars us or pushes us off the path, it kind of can be stress or grief or disturbance. It can be the normal stuff of life, can sometimes seem like a spider that's come to sit alongside of us and threaten us to bite us, right? It could be a death, it could be an accident, a calamity, it could be work itself, it could be your friends, it could be the government. There's many, many things that we can see as responsible for taking us and making us sick, either in our mind, in our heart, in our soul, or in our body. And this sense of disease is what we're here to look at today. Okay. So, like I said, it can be anything. And what's key is that it can impact any one of the four areas that we talked about. So let's take a look at what happens to the mind when it is grieving. let's say. And I think we can lump the rest of our conversation into talking about these areas when they grieve, because so much of what's going on with the pandemic is really about grieving the normal way of life. And so much when we're dealing with distress in our life is we're grieving the loss of our normal way of existing. And that's why we're having a hard time, where we need to feel as if we can apply self-care. That's the whole reason why we want self-care, is because we feel like we are we have lost something, a piece of ourselves, a piece of society, a piece of our family. Okay. So what happens to the mind, right? That place that we talked about as being able to think and to plan and to organize, right? What happens to the mind when it's grieving? Well, it loses the ability to make decisions. It becomes irresponsible. It's disinterested. It's unable to do certain things. It feels stymied. It feels trapped. It feels numb. It's lost its sense of play, and it's always serious. It's inflexible or incapable. There's a sense of disorder or frozenness and forgetfulness. And generally, the mind, when it has experienced a loss of any kind, it predominantly feels lost. It doesn't know where it is. Right? How many times after a death have you been at a hospital, let's say, with your family? Death occurs, you leave because you're going to go back to somebody's house to have something to eat because you've all been at the hospital for 14 hours, or you're going to go get a cup of coffee because you've been at the hospital for 14 hours, and you get out to the parking lot and you can't find your car, or you can't find your keys, or you took a coffee order when you were in the hospital and now you can't remember what the order was. So that sense of loss is a part of the grieving process that the mind is going through. And it's actually a part of how it deals with what's happened. Okay. But this is the way in which the mind can respond when it is grieving. Let's take a look at how the heart responds. What does the heart feel when it's grieving? The heart can feel loveless. It can feel serious too, as if play is not a responsible thing. It can feel kind of rugged, kind of rough. It can feel jealous. It can feel a sense of abruptness. It can be sad. It can feel disturbed. It can feel impatient or hopeless or numb or envious or angry or joyless. It can be fearful. It can be folly free. It won't allow for any folly. It can be undelighted. Right? So the heart can feel all of these things when it has experienced a loss. So do you see the distance between the capability of the mind when it's functioning normally without a grief response, and then the mind after the grief response? Completely different beast. This is why we feel so very, very different when we are going through something where we need a sense of self-care. It's because we feel as if I can look over there and see my old mind or my old heart, but I'm over here with this new mind and this new heart, and I just want to get back, right? So the remedy then becomes the bridge to getting us back to where we are functioning normally. Sometimes it takes time, and sometimes the remedy can include time. Sometimes the remedy is just situational, and we apply these remedies to help us get back across the bridge, and it doesn't take as much time. Right? So this is how the heart feels when it's grieving or it's lost or disturbed. Let's take a look at the soul, right? So remember, soul is deeper, much more drive oriented. It's the passions. Another way to look at it is the hopes and dreams that we have reside in the soul. So our hopes for intimacy and connection to community and our vocation, all those drives come from the soul. So when the soul has lost, it seems to function like this. It can feel faithless. It has no faith in anything. It can feel disingenuous, like anything it says is not real. It can feel dreamless and hopeless, right? No sense of being able to gain any confidence within, right? It could be serious and fearful. It can feel alone. It can be prayerless. Can be unforgiving. Can be disorganized. It can be discordant. It can be restless. It can be desireless, right? So this soul that has utter and complete absence, right? You can feel the complete distance between the old normal soul and now this soul that is in distress or is grieving. One has hope and ambition and it has a future in its sights. And now this soul here that is grieving, it's like, oh, what's the bother? Why would I even want to? I can't. It's the Eeyore, right? The Eeyore soul. Okay. So that's how the soul that is lost is feeling. And now, finally, for the final phase, and let's talk about the body. What does the body go through when it has had a massive loss? Well, we feel numb for sure. We feel lost and confused very often, not just emotionally or cognitively, but physically. We don't feel like we know where we're going to go. We can be disinterested. We can be having a feeling of atrophy, that we're just kind of sitting around rotting on our bones or losing muscle tone, emotional and physical as well. We can feel immobile. We can feel a sense of instability, a sense of sleeplessness. So the body can feel all of these things, right, during its time of loss. Okay. So now what we want to do is we want to kind of take a look and say, well, how do we then figure out where the problem is? And I think it's a real simple process, right? The process is just say to yourself, what's going on? Where's my initial sense where the disturbance is? And, basically when I'm sitting with somebody, I'll say, what brought you here today? What is it that you want to talk about? So ask yourself, what is it you want to talk about? And then try to decide which category it fits in. Are you having a problem with your body? That'll be pretty obvious, right? The harder ones to discern are going to be between the heart and the soul, but they're very, very similar. And so some of the remedies are very similar as well. But sometimes our problem that we're having is with our mind, um, like we are feeling a sense of loss and we want to help our mind get back across that bridge to our old normal mind. So we have to look for a remedy that is suited to helping the mind heal or to mend. Okay. And keep in mind, this is not going to take everything away, right? One dose of whatever our remedy is not going to make us whole, but it's going to be addressing the area where there seems to be a conflict. I think the easiest way to get a sense of remedies is one of the things that I genuinely always tell people that have just been through a loss is, I know this is going to sound silly, but one of the things that you can do for yourself, for your mind, and for the rest of your person is to start carrying around with you a little book, a little journal, a little composition book or a steno pad, right? And write things down, because one of the things your mind's not going to do well is remember. And when you think of something that you want to remember, instead of putting it here, put it down on paper. And so some of these things will help you see that these are also then remedies to help soothe and reintegrate the mind. So we know that stories help reintegrate because they try to unify our whole self, but telling stories is really good. Games and puzzles can be good in moderation, right? Because sometimes the game or the puzzle can imitate the feeling of confusion that you're having. But if you're having a difficulty because you're having bad memories about something, that's a good time to try puzzles, right? And to try games and maybe crosswords, right? But if you're having confusion, that's probably not a good time to do it. So your remedies might also be in something that you can read, right? Because your mind loves to read, but you may have difficulty, right? So choosing what it is that you read will really be helpful. Meditation is something that people find really helpful for their mind. Planning, doing things with other people and planning is very, very helpful. And I think another very powerful remedy for the mind is to be with other people. Do things with them, because then you'll kind of feel like you're in your normal setting again and again and again. So if you feel like where you're being bombarded the most is your mind, your ability to think or your ability to have control over your life, try some of these remedies. Okay, the next is your heart. Well, if you're feeling as if your dis-ease is in your heart, what are things that you can do to help the heart feel like it's getting back to normal? Um, basically what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to give it emotions that will basically um, prime the pump and get the heart starting to feel again differently than it is now. So things that are good for that are music, right? Art is good for that. Poetry, photos and scrapbooks, really, really good for that. Being around water, being around children and grandchildren, being in nature or in gardens. The ocean is pretty powerful here. I think hiking, I think volunteering is a very, very powerful way to feel and a remedy for feeling that's gone astray, right? Celebrations, getting together and celebrating things, rituals also. Okay. So remedies for the heart are a little bit different than they are for the mind, right? The mind might be happy, it might find a remedy in opening up that pantry and organizing it, right? Because you get done and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I was able to do something with my mind again. It's sort of like planning this in service. It was great to submerge myself in data and slides and Word documents and PDFs and PowerPoints for a while, because then I didn't have to think about the pandemic. I was able to think about organizing my thoughts for this. So the same with the heart. How can you allow your heart to feel in such a way that it can almost forget about for a moment what other things it is experiencing that are disturbing it? And I can't say this enough, and I haven't said it yet in this in this in service, but I do say it all the time. So if you've heard it before, please forgive me. But distractions are not a bad thing. Right? Distractions allow us to see other things, and when we are distracted by something, it gives us an appreciation from the thing itself that we are distracting ourselves from, if that makes sense. The easiest example in the pandemic has been for people to understand that when we leave the house in the morning, we are being distracted from our worldly obligations um, and our list of tasks and obligations we have on the home front, because we're going to work, right? We're traveling to work. And during that time, we are slowly distracted from the minutia of what it means to be a householder. And then when we get to work, we are inundated by what it means to be an employee or, a worker. And so we completely have forgotten about home. um, and then the same thing happens at the end of that day. When then we start to get in the car, we head home, and the distractions on the way home help us to process our day, but they help us to make disconnections. They distract us from our work day so that when we get home, we can be fully a householder and a family member again. So distractions are often seen as a negative thing, and I don't think that they are. I think what is negative is when we don't have some connection to acknowledging distractions and our ability to choose the ones that are healthful or wholesome, and that we can actually use a distraction if we can select it ourselves to help us grow, right? So I think these distractions will be good for the heart. Now, how about for the soul? What are things that we can do? What are remedies? What are the boards that the bridge is made up between our normal soulful self and this soulful self that is feeling like it has this big spider sitting next to it? So I think journaling, being with family, right? And not necessarily having to do anything, but just being with them. Again, art and music and painting and poetry, all of those artistic venues tend to be very soulful. They're also emotional at some point, but when you start to recognize the healing power of the arts in your lives or hobbies, then they move from being just emotional releases to being soulful releases. I think the ocean, I said, or beaches, dancing is really very soulful. Worship, dream work, very, very soul work oriented. If you do dream work, if you remember your dreams, if you write your dreams down, this is a very, very powerful way of taking hold and understanding what's going on in this deep area of your life, and a way of allowing it to give some voice to that area of your life. I think back to one of the first big pandemic dreams I had during this cycle of illness was After just being home for 4 weeks in a row and realizing that there was like no place for me to go except here and to work and here to play and here to be family and here to have religious services and here to have hobbies. I mean, everything here. Um, after after that number of weeks, I woke up one morning with a big chuckle in my heart and on my face because I had a dream where uh, I was living in a home that was all sprawling, monstrous city-size home, all on one floor. Very important as you get older, all on one floor, and it had everything I needed. There was a Starbucks there. There was a place to get my hair done. There was a which I don't really need to. A bookstore. There was a library. There was a Quaker meeting there. Everything that I needed was in that one space. Well, and when I woke up, I realized that that's the way it is now for this home that we live in. It's not as big as in the dream, but actually all the things in my life are jammed into this home right now. So but dream work can be so powerful, and when I was able to write that dream down and then just laugh about it, I felt this immense sense of lifting, of this ominous feeling of being trapped, right? Because I had identified that really everything I need is here. There was something freeing in that. I know that the other side of that is, oh my gosh, everything I need is here. It's like you're bored of it, you're tired of it. But we have to allow ourselves to hear our own soul into existence. Our interior life, our emotional life, our cognitive life, they all have something they're trying to tell us. And dis-ease happens when we don't listen to that area, right? When we refuse to see that there's a gap between what's normal for the mind and what I'm thinking now when I'm on this side of the bridge, my disturbed um, and grieving mind, right? When we don't acknowledge that there's a distance there and we don't listen to what is it that can help me get back to that, or what is it in that normal mind that I find so appealing? When we don't listen, then we foster the disease. So dream work is a very, very powerful way to hear pieces of ourselves talk to other pieces of ourselves. Very, very emblematic in the healing process. Okay, so again, this also is the place where deep hobbies are very, very helpful. For me, a hobby that I have every day is in the morning, I get up, I'll think about what I want to paint for that day or what I want to write for that day, and then I'll start it. And then I have something to begin with or a place to start at when my workday's over. I can turn around to my easel, which is on the side of my desk, or I can turn to my journal, which is under my desk, and then I can pick up where I left off because these hobbies have been around in my life for a long time, and they are there and established in my soulful self, and they are a part of my routine bridge. Um, what you're going to begin to find is you're going to recognize what is helpful for the different things that arise. But the key is that you can't try to apply the remedy to the toe if it's the thumb that is feeling the pain. Does that make sense? The whole reason, I mean, that's really the basics of this entire talk. The rest of it's just fluff and word clouds, right? But if you look at the different areas, find out where it is that you've been hit with the hammer, and that's what you should work on. Don't work on something that's not related, because when you get done, you're not going to feel good, right? Let's give an example. If you're feeling, and this is a feeling that I've carried with me throughout my life, you're feeling as if you're stressed out about your weight, right? It is not a good or helpful idea. Let me take the word good out of it because good and bad can be such stumbling blocks. It is not a helpful thing to move forward and to use shopping on the way home from work as a remedy for feeling bad about your weight, because eventually what will happen is you'll start shopping for french fries or a double cheeseburger or so just because you're going out to do something for yourself, you have to select the right piece to be that first piece of wood in the bridge, and then the second piece of wood. When we're having images, difficulties about self-images that revolve around, let's say, weight, then maybe what we want to do is look for a remedy that also aids us in helping us lose some weight, right? So you see how that laser kind of focus is important. So I can't tell you the number of times that I've given these workshops and people kind of roll their eyes and say, "I've tried everything." My suggestion would be maybe you haven't tried the right thing for the right ailment. That's all. Not really, to be honest with you, I don't want that to sound like I'm challenging your judgment. It's just that we very rarely talk about this, right? But I think now that we're talking about it, I think you'll recognize it makes good sense, that if you tailor the remedy, or I like the word that the Buddhists use for this, the antidote, right? If we tailor the antidote, we might be able to find a little bit more success in removing that dis-ease. So now let's look at the body. What about the physical, right? What are things that we can do as remedies to get back to that other body, that normal sense of physical identity? We can do breathing exercise, very, very powerful, particularly when it's the body that is feeling, anxious. Doing breathing exercises can help calm down the physiological response. Because remember, while we've just divided the body or the identity into four areas, they all kind of function together, and the lines aren't as clear between the different aggregates as I've painted them out to be here. So here's a perfect example of how a physical activity of breathing can calm the physical activity of physical anxiety, and at the same time can approach the anxiety that exists on a soulful or emotional, right? Or even in a mental fashion, right? Mental anxiety is the inability to focus on something, right? While you're reading. Okay. So stretching, I think, is good. Cooking can be very, very therapeutic for the body. Dancing, yoga, painting, walking, running, writing, massage, nails, right? Having your nails done, right? Pampering your body. So that means taking a nice hot bath, having a nice hot tub with a glass of wine, right? Singing. This is again, singing is one of those things that kind of transverses all of these quadrants of our lives. Singing and music can be one of the most healthy things that exists, right? Or the ability to listen to somebody reading to you, right? Physical activity, reading out loud, also calms the emotions and the soul and the mind. So here in the body, we have a great chance of doing activities that can strengthen us physically, but also impact the other quadrants of our life. Okay. So I'm hoping that this has sparked a little bit of an interest in you and understanding that most often the reason we don't find success in taking care of ourselves is because we don't acknowledge that we're doing something to take care of ourselves. And we also don't look for exactly where the distress is coming from and then try to find a remedy or antidote for that particular part of our life. Okay. So I've developed this little worksheet for you. It's something that you can go through if you want to take a look at finding one or two or three things in your life on a monthly basis, or however frequently you want to try to route out things that are causing you distress. You can turn to this worksheet, and basically it asks, what is it that's disturbing you? What's the spider that sat down beside you, right? And where is it impacting your life? And circle whether it's impacting your individual life, your family life, your social life, or your global life, okay? And then what are the individual impacts to you? What are your individual impacts? How is this impacting your body? How is this thing impacting your thinking? How is this thing impacting your feeling? How is this thing impacting your drives and desires in your life? And just write those things down. And then the second page is how is this impacting your family? This very thing. How is this impacting your society? And that society doesn't mean, just America. It means like all of your social groups. Like if you're a member of a church or synagogue or temple, how's this impacting your community, right? Or your neighborhood, right? Or your workplace, right? Because that's another piece of social engagement. And then what are the global impacts? How is this impacting life here on Earth? And some of the answers to this maybe it's not, or you're not interested in figuring that part out. Right now, you want to work on the individual. So then what's a good idea is then to go back and figure out if you can create for yourself a goal and an intervention that you'll use to help yourself. Now, I've listed a goal and an intervention for each of the social layers or social aggregates that you could do, but you may only want to do it in the individual realm, right? And my suggestion is really only work with one goal and intervention at a time. If you're having a difficult time, um, let's say you're having a distress and you're not able to concentrate. This is one thing that people have talked about over and over again. Unable to concentrate, unable to focus while they're sitting down and doing work during this pandemic, then I think a wonderful bridge back to the normal way of thinking and focusing is to read out loud, because it's a change up. It's you're reading what it is you're trying to focus on, but you're putting it out in the universe audibly, and it helps you to focus in two layers. Once the visual stimulation of the words that are being interpreted, but if you're having difficulty with that, then the sound reiterates the interpretation of what you're looking at or trying to piece together. So that's like a perfect goal. The goal is I want to be less distracted when I'm reading or working. And the intervention is I'm going to read aloud when I'm having difficulty understanding something or focusing. Or it could just be that you want to read aloud every night, right? Uh, Maybe you're feeling as if there's a conflict in your soul because you're not able to spend as much quality one-on-one time with your spouse because there's so many things pulling at you at work and so many other things in the family pulling at you. You don't have any time together, downtime. So maybe what you're saying is, in my soul, I'm not feeling as connected to my spouse, because community is a soulful venture, right? Love, deep love, intimacy. I'm not feeling as intimate. And so maybe what you do is every night at bedtime, you read a book together or you listen to Audible books together. But it's a way of saying, I'm feeling like the disturbance is in my soul and I don't feel as connected to my spouse as I usually do. So what can I do? What from that list of soulful remedies can I do that will help me work on that area? And I think that would provide a goal, right? To feel closer and more intimate with my spouse or loved one or partner or, tree or dog or whatever it is. And the intervention is that we will, read 3 pages a night or listen to one chapter of a book each night, or, just sit next to each other on the bed and breathe deeply, for 10 breaths, whatever. But the key is to find something that addresses, it's not like rocket science, but it is not something that we usually think of, which is to develop a remedy or antidote that will fix and help us to build a bridge back to what it feels like to be normal in that area of our life. So I hope it's been helpful. I hope it's been a little bit of a mind bend, because I think that's how we learn. I hope you love the little word um, clouds that I gave you. I've put all this together in a handout so that you actually have my speaking notes here. Right, you'll have the whole thing. It goes through each of those areas and it describes the slide that you saw and the different things that are there. So if you forget, oh, what is it that he said about the soul? What is it the soul does again? I can't remember what he was thinking. It's all here for you. You can take a look at that. But try to use that in your daily life in a fashion that will help you feel not stress-free, because I don't know if that's possible, but a little bit more like you're approaching what you want normal to look like for you. And most often that means building a bridge to who we've been in the past. But you can also use the same template to find things that you've not really done well in life and build a bridge to normal that involves you becoming somebody different than you used to be in the past. So good luck with things. Please don't hesitate to reach out. My email is in all of the literature. Take care.